Hello, welcome back everybody. PayPal and Patreon are down below if you want to support me, and we'll do so if you actually can. Anyways, it's time for the monthly OPEC oil production levels update. And as always, if you want access to the graphs used in this video or hundreds of others across all kinds of different data types and subjects, a link to the drive containing all of those is in the description. So starting with the largest OPEC member, obviously Saudi Arabia, who was normally holding a 10 million barrel per day plateau, and as of present, accounting for recent small field discoveries, could, if they go back up fully to 10, maintain said plateau up until probably 2032, maybe into early 2033. It would depend. Their prior end of plateau expectation date was a bit closer than that. And that is the reason why they've always been the ones pushing to basically eternally extend the production cuts every time that OPEC starts any. The longer they do so, the further they push out the edge of their plateau capability further into the future. So for the last few years under the production cut regime, they were holding down around 9. Usually, at times, they went down to 8.5. However, the cuts ended in April as the full facade of OPEC's cohesion, their cooperation as a group, was effectively done as everybody except for Algeria and Kuwait were disobeying and just doing whatever they wanted. So the cuts have now ended, with Saudi Arabia originally saying that they were going to still keep their production down at 9 million barrels per day out of their own will, on their own volition. But it looks like that was a lie, as for the last 3 months they have actually been increasing their production despite saying that they wouldn't. And so now they're, as of this month, back up over 9.5, at 9.53 million barrels per day. Algeria peaked at about 1.4 and had declined down close to 1, although some new discoveries and enhanced recovery stuff were going to be keeping them there for a little bit. However, the production cuts came and they obeyed them, although they kind of signaled they were about to stop if the cuts hadn't been ended in April. They were holding down around 900,000, and they have been coming back up as the cuts ended. Now they're back up to 937,000, probably going back up to roughly a million. We'll see if they can make it over that. Libya continuing to try to restore the production levels that it held before the civil war started, all 4 times that it started off and on. They have made it back up close to about 1.4. Pre-Civil War, they were at about 1.6. This time in particular, they came in at 1.38. Nigeria used to hold around 2 million barrels per day. However, a mix of things, terrorist attacks, oil pipeline theft networks, and internal government corruption, misdirecting funds that were otherwise supposed to be reinvested into maintaining the national oil and gas infrastructure, had caused their capacity to degrade down to only about 1.3. And over the last year or so, they've managed to pull some stuff back together and bring themselves back up just a bit over 1.5, usually, this time coming in at 1.56 million barrels per day. The UAE normally holding a 3 million barrel per day plateau, usually or previously. They want to go up to 4 instead, since their export margin was thinning as their own domestic consumption, their own oil demand is up to usually about 1.2 million barrels per day now. They didn't actually cut down to the levels they were supposed to begin with. And before the production cuts ended, a few months before, they just already went back up and they went all the way up to like 3.2. Then for the last couple months, they went back down to 2.8 or 2.9 as they shut some stuff off as they were connecting new portions of one of their larger offshore fields in the Persian Gulf. Now that work is done and they're back up to 3.17 million barrels per day. And we will see if they continue just going all the way up to 4 like they intend to. Kuwait also had normally been at a plateau, usually around 3, and they cut down to about 2.6. Then they went further down to 2.4, and they have just now slowly started turning themselves back up, coming up to 2.45 million barrels per day. Iraq otherwise could be at about 5, and just before everything, they were fluctuating between 4.5 and 4.8. But when the cuts started, they were supposed to go all the way down to 3.8. However, they entered a repeating pattern of going down close to 4, but then reactivating stuff and going back up to 4.5. They've had some delays with restoring production after the cuts ended, as they were up until recently still having disputes with Turkey about flow rates or charge rates, fees, and whatever regarding the pipeline that Iraq uses to export oil through Turkey, as they don't export all of it via the port in Basra. At the moment, they had been under 4, but they just came back up to 4.02. Iran once held a 6 million barrel per day plateau. Then the revolution happened in 79. They never recovered from that and were only able to hold a 4 million barrel per day plateau up until the late 2010s when the mega sanctions happened. They were not allowed to sell to anyone, so they dropped to only supplying their domestic oil demand, which was around 2 million. However, as the sanctions started getting released, they were able to export again and started bringing their production back up, but they're not able to really return to 4 million barrels per day. A lot of their fields are too degraded at this point. They were already old, mature fields that have been producing for a long time, but they also now have the decreased pressure gradient settling effect that you see when fields are turned off for multiple years on end. To counter that, Iran re-injects a whole lot of natural gas into their oil fields to try to keep a decent flow rate, and that has caused supply issues domestically with their natural gas supply over the last few years, causing power shortages and in the winter causing heating issues. They were only able to get over 3.3 and now have slipped back down from that for the last few months, this time coming in at 3.25 million barrels per day. Venezuela once held a plateau around 3, and given the sheer scale of the Orinoco Belt, could hold that for the entire century plus. And they collapsed in the later 2010s and took their oil production down with them, all the way down to only 400,000 barrels per day. However, with the aid of Chevron primarily, they have been able to gradually bring themselves back up and are now over 1 million. It looked briefly like that was going to be put to a stop as the current U.S. administration initially barred Chevron from continuing to aid Venezuela, however, then did one of many famous 180s on policy and allowed Chevron to actually continue. So now Venezuela's oil production has resumed being restored very slowly, this time climbing from 1.07 to 1.08 million barrels per day, and to small members in southern Africa, Gabon, who had their higher points up in the 300s, mid 300s, upper 300s, had declined down to only about 180, brought a new, moderately sized field online a number of months back that brought them back up over 230, and they're still around there at the moment, this time at 228,000 barrels per day. And the Republic of the Congo, the smaller of the two, the stable Congo out of the two Congos. The larger one is the unstable one. The smaller Congo, the oil producer, they also saw their high points up in the 300s, and they declined down to the mid 200s, and they've been holding off here for a little bit. However, they do not have much more to work with. This time they came in at 271,000 barrels per day. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon are down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. A link to that drive folder with all these graphs and all kinds of other graphs and data is in the description. There's links to my photography Instagram, my Blue Sky, and one in the top pinned comment to my cat's YouTube channel. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.